In the previous lesson, we created the foundation of our post module. But now, before we continue, let's create a post branch. And we still have our user in there. We can safely delete now that we merged it into our dev. So let's use git branch -d for delete and pass user. Now if you check a branch again, we have the master branch. And let's create a branch for our post. We'll use git checkout as a b flag to create a new branch. Let's call it post. Now let's commit these changes. Git add dot git commit -m to pass a message. Okay, now we're ready to start. Let's go over to our post service, and we're going to start with the create. For us to create anything, we need to create a reference point in our database where the data will be stored. And we saw that before. We're going to need to import Angular Firestore, which is our database, a collection, and let's import also a document for us to use later when we need to get a single post for the updates and delete. Now let's reference the Firebase in our constructor. Let's create a post collection. That will be a post, and we need to import our post model. Now inside our constructor, we can get that post collection and give it a reference in our database. Let's call it post. When you reference a database, you can also pass some extra parameters in here, like order by. We can also limit the items that is gonna be retrieved. For now, let's create one so you can see how it's done. It's a reference. Here, let's pass our order by and use the claps, and then you can choose how you're gonna display the data, like we're gonna do this descending. If you add a dot, you can see all the available query types, where you can use for the condition type query filter. Well, let's use the limit, which, as the name says, will limit to that amount of results. So this is, you can just play with it and see just play around with it and choose one that will suit your app. Now let's add our create function. This will receive a data from our component, and that will be a post. And we return the post collection. And add is a method that comes from Angular Fire, and we're gonna give it the data that we received. Now let's go to our dashboard component and start to build our form. This will be a reactive form, so we can use validation. Although you can use a simple form for it, it's always better to use a reactive form in case your app grows and you want to add validation or you want to improve upon it. Enough talking, let's go ahead and start building our form. We will import the form builder, form control, and form group. We're also going to create a post form, reference the post service form builder in our constructor. Let's create private post service. Was auto imported. Now let's do the same for the form builder. Now back in the authentication module on the signups and sign in component, here we create the form straight into the constructor. which is not really recommended. The constructor, it belongs to the JavaScript class and is out of control of Angular. So it's always best to create on ng-init, which is the Angular's version of constructor. So this time, let's create our form builder and then pass it to the ng-init, so it will decide when it's best to initialize the form. You can still do this way, but adding it to the ng-on-init is what Angular recommends. So let's create our form. In here, let's reference the post form. And let's make it a form builder group. And now let's add the title, which, as you saw before, it's an array because you can still add the validations in here. I won't be adding any validation this time, but feel free to do it. We give it an empty string. Let's also add the draft and make it false. Now we can add to the Angular constructor. Create form. Okay. Now we need to use that create function in the post service. Let's create a save post function. We take the data from the component, which will be a post. And Angular is asking for the post model. Post model. Let's create a variable with the form data. Which will be a post, and we're going to create an object with our post information. You have an author, and this is gonna come from the authentication. Gonna get the current user ID. So let's add our authentication service to our constructor. Auth service. Imported. Need a comma in here. It has a title. This is gonna come from the post form. And we need its value. We're gonna add an image to it later on. Which we're gonna get our uploader function to add to this image URL string placeholder in here. You're gonna add a null so we don't get an error when the component loads. The content, this comes from the post form as well. And we're gonna get its value. Let's do the draft. Also its value. And let's add the published. And here is gonna be a new date. It will be created like a timestamp. And let's add the claps. We start with a 0 clap. Now to avoid the users to click the button and create an empty post, let's add a if statement and check if the form is untouched. But before that, let's check in the official documentation. Here in the docs, the fundamentals, and if you go on form, reactive forms, and if you have a look in here on the side, there is inspect form controls property. This will give you the ability to check if the form is being modified. So we have these options in here. We can check the status, if it's valid, invalid, pending, or disabled. We also have a pristine. We're going to use the untouched method. Back in our function, let's create the if statement. If our form it's untouched, then we can return and create with the form data. I'm gonna call that create from our post service, and we're going to pass this form data. After, let's just reset the form to its original state so the user can add a new form. Reset. And now you're ready to create our user interface. Let's delete everything from here. And we're going to add it to a math card. We're going to have two sections, one for the image and one for the form. Let's build the form first. I'm going to add a form. We do not need the action. Let's call the form group and give it our post form. We're also going to add the ng submit that will listen for the click event on the bottom. And here we will pass the save post data. Now we're going to need a title, a content, and a toggle button. So let's just add form field. Input. We don't need the type. We're going to add the math input so we can get the Angular material styles. Let's add a placeholder. And here let's give a form control name. And it's a title. Just copy this one and add for the content. And let's use a text array in here. Remember, we need to close it. Now let's add a math slide toggle that we import earlier on. Inside, you're gonna ask, is it published? And here we're gonna add the form control name. And pass the draft. The form control name will link the data from the user input to our backend. Now let's just create our button. And our form is ready. We have a title, content, the draft, and a button for submit. Now let's give it some styling so it doesn't look so bad. So let's give it the form field 100 width, 100%, and that already looks much better. We're going to add an image as well, so let's go ahead and add the image and give it 100% width as well. Now back in our component, dashboard.html, just leave the placeholder in here for the image, which we're going to create later. Let's create a test and save it. And nothing happens. The form is not getting resetted and we're not getting any feedback from the component. So let's go and find out why. The problem is in the bottom because it's not doing anything, nor resetting, nor sending the data. Here we have submit. And here it's a typo. Submit. Hopefully you caught that before. Let's create another test. Let's mark it publish and save. And in our Firebase database, just refreshing here. And now we have our post collection. It creates its ID and it populates the alpha with the current user's ID in here as intended. Have 0 claps and everything works.